the black garbage bag felt heavier than it should have. Aaron Whitmore stood in the doorway of the homeless shelter, 47 years old, watching men twice his age shuffle past him with that same defeated look. Everything he'd built over 2 decades gone. 22 years at the manufacturing plant, erased in a single corporate restructuring meeting. The house his father helped him buy, keys surrendered to the bank 3 days ago. His wife's attorney had called that morning to finalize paperwork that would legally end what emotionally died months earlier. 7 days. That's all it took for a life to unravel completely. The shelter smelled of industrial cleaner and something else, something intangible, the scent of surrendered dreams. Around him, men stared at walls with hollow eyes, their spirits broken long before their circumstances were. Aaron saw his future in their faces if he made the wrong choice in the next 60 seconds. This is the reality nobody discusses when they celebrate success stories. They show you the penthouse, not the pavement. They photograph the breakthrough, not the breaking point. He walked out at 6 in the morning, no plan, no strategy. Just a decision. Not a wish, not a hope, a decision. The difference is everything. A wish is passive, a pleasant fantasy you entertain while circumstances control you. A decision is a line drawn in your mind that changes your entire relationship with reality. Aaron walked 4 miles to the public library, the same building he'd visited maybe twice in his entire adult life. He waited outside in the November cold until the doors opened at 9. When those glass doors unlocked, he walked straight to the business section. His hands moved across spines until he gathered every book on manufacturing management, operational efficiency, and entrepreneurship he could carry. He found a table in the corner, away from the computers where people search for jobs they'd never get, and he began to read. Not casually. Not the way people scroll through articles on their phones, absorbing nothing, retaining less. He read the way a surgeon studies anatomy, the way an attorney dissects case law that will define their career. Here's what nobody tells you about rock bottom. It's the most solid foundation you'll ever build on. When you have nothing to protect. When you have nothing to protect, you can take risks that cautious people never attempt. When you take those risks, you access possibilities that comfortable people never imagine. Aaron didn't understand this intellectually at first. He felt it instinctively. The fear that would have paralyzed him when he had a salary and a mortgage couldn't touch him now. What was there left to fear? He'd already lost everything. Every morning for 3 months, the same ritual. Wake at 5 in his car, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the overnight manager pretended not to notice. Wash up in their restroom. Buy coffee with spare change from odd jobs moving furniture, cleaning gutters, anything that paid cash. Walk to the library. From 9 until 6, he studied. He filled notebooks with insights about lean manufacturing, supply chain optimization, quality control systems, statistical process control. He analyzed case studies of companies that succeeded and companies that failed, searching for patterns, for principles, for the invisible laws that governed industrial success. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. This is where most people stop. They read, they learn, they attend workshops, they collect certificates, and they remain exactly where they are. Aaron understood something fundamental. He had to test his knowledge against reality. At 6 o'clock, when the library closed, he'd spend 2 hours walking through industrial areas, studying factories from the outside, observing their operations through chain-link fences. He watched shift changes, noted inefficiencies in loading dock procedures, observed waste management patterns, analyzed traffic flow during peak hours. Then he started writing. Every evening, back in his car, he'd write detailed operational assessments of companies he'd observed. These weren't complaints. They were professional analyses with specific, actionable recommendations backed by data. He'd document where bottlenecks occurred, where money hemorrhaged through inefficient processes, where simple changes could increase output by 15 or 20%. Each report took 3 to 4 hours to complete. He wrote by the interior light of his car, his breath visible in the cold air, his hands cramped from gripping the pen. After 2 weeks, he had 14 comprehensive reports. Now came the part that separated intention from transformation. He had to present them. He had to walk into these companies, past security guards, past receptionists trained to deflect people exactly like him, and convince someone with actual authority to read his work. The old Aaron, the comfortable Aaron with direct deposit and benefits, would have sent emails, would have waited for responses that never came, would have given up after 3 rejections. This Aaron walked through the front door. The first company had security escort him out. The second told him they weren't hiring. The third listened for 90 seconds before dismissing him. The fourth asked him to leave his information, which went straight into a drawer he'd never see opened. The fifth never returned his calls. The sixth, seventh, and eighth doors closed in his face with various degrees of politeness, but the message was identical: leave. Most people would have stopped. Most people would have decided the universe was sending them a message that they should accept their circumstances, that some things aren't meant to be. But here's the profound truth about achievement against overwhelming odds. The universe doesn't send messages, it sends tests. It wants to know how badly you want what you say you want. It wants to see if you'll quit when quitting makes perfect sense. On his 23rd attempt, Aaron walked into a mid-sized precision parts manufacturer. The receptionist moved to intercept him with practiced efficiency, but the operations manager happened to be crossing the lobby. Something made him stop. Maybe the intensity in Aaron's eyes. Maybe the professional portfolio he carried despite clothes that had seen too many wears between washes. He agreed to give Aaron 5 minutes. Aaron opened his folder. He'd spent 6 hours the previous week observing this facility from every legal vantage point. He showed the operations manager his analysis, pointing out 3 critical inefficiencies visible from their parking lot alone. He explained how a simple reorganization of their shipping schedule could reduce overtime costs by 18%. He detailed how their current inventory system was costing them approximately $43,000 annually in unnecessary carrying costs. He spoke with the authority of someone who'd spent 22 years on factory floors, combined with the fresh perspective of someone who'd spent 3 months studying operational excellence with nothing else to do. The operations manager didn't hire him. He didn't offer him a job. He did something better. He asked Aaron to prove his analysis was correct. He gave him 1 week, unsupervised access to study their operations and the opportunity to present findings to the executive team. No pay, no guarantees, no promises, just a chance. That's all Aaron needed. 1 opening, 1 opportunity to demonstrate value. 7 days later, he presented a 40-page operational assessment that identified $1.2 million in annual savings through process optimization, waste reduction, and strategic scheduling changes. They offered him a consulting contract that afternoon, not out of charity, not because they felt sorry for him, because he'd made himself too valuable to ignore. That was 11 years ago. Today, Aaron runs a manufacturing consultancy firm that serves 17 Fortune 500 companies across 3 continents, employing 43 people, generating revenue that would have seemed impossible from that shelter doorway. But here's what matters more than his success: the understanding he gained in that homeless shelter, in that library, in that freezing car. He learned that your circumstances are nothing but raw material. What you build from them depends entirely on the decisions you make when the world tells you to quit. Amal Hadid stepped off the plane with $40 in her pocket and a suitcase held together with rope. 19 years old. English was her 4th language, behind Arabic, French, and Somali. She had no family waiting at arrivals, no friend holding a welcome sign, no safety net of any kind, just an address for a refugee assistance program written on a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were starting to tear. The caseworker who processed her intake spoke slowly, as if volume could bridge the language gap. Amal nodded, understanding perhaps 1 word in 5, too proud to admit her confusion. She left that office with a list of resources she couldn't read and directions to a shared apartment with 3 other women she'd never met. The first night, she lay awake on a donated mattress, listening to unfamiliar sounds through thin walls, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake leaving the refugee camp. At least there, she knew the rules. Here, everything was foreign. She found work within a week. A cleaning company hired her for overnight shifts in office buildings downtown. $4 an hour, paid in cash, no questions about work authorization. She'd arrive at 11 at night, vacuum endless corridors of cubicles, empty trash bins, scrub toilets until 3 in the morning. Then she'd take 2 buses to a 24-hour diner where she washed dishes until 7. After that, another bus to a dry cleaner where she pressed shirts until noon. 3 jobs, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. The money barely covered rent and food. There was nothing left for the classes she needed, nothing left for proper shoes that didn't leave her feet bleeding, nothing left for the life she'd imagined when she'd decided to rebuild herself in a new country. But Amal had learned something essential in the refugee camp that most people born into comfort never grasp. Progress isn't measured in leaps. It's measured in millimeters. Every dollar saved, every English word mastered, every small indignity endured without breaking. These weren't setbacks, they were investments. She started carrying a notebook everywhere. When she cleaned offices, she'd read papers left on desks, copying words she didn't know. During bus rides between jobs, she'd study these words, asking other passengers what they meant, enduring their impatience, their condescension, their outright rudeness. Some people would explain. Most would ignore her. A few would mock her accent. She wrote down every word, anyway. Language was power, and she was accumulating power, one vocabulary list at a time. After 6 months, she enrolled in a community college ESL program. Night classes, naturally, because her days belonged to survival. She'd finish her shift at the diner, race across town, and slip into class at 8, often still smelling of dish soap and fryer grease. The instructor was kind, but the other students weren't always. They'd laugh when she mispronounced words, whisper when she asked questions, exclude her from study groups. Amal kept showing up. Here's what she understood that they didn't. Their laughter was temporary, but her determination was permanent. They would forget her in a week. She would remember this struggle for the rest of her life, and it would fuel every future victory. Mockery only has power if you grant it power. Amal granted it nothing. She studied harder, spoke more, raised her hand more frequently, refused to hide in the back row where failure goes to feel comfortable. By month 9, her English had improved enough to apply for better positions. She printed 50 resumes at the library, 7 cents per page, money that could have bought food. She applied to entry-level administrative positions, customer service roles, anything that didn't involve a mop or a dishwasher. The rejections came swiftly. Underqualified, overqualified, not the right fit. We've decided to pursue other candidates. Thank you for your interest. She tracked every rejection in her notebook, not out of bitterness, but out of strategy. She analyzed patterns. Certain industries never responded. Others sent form letters. Some invited her for interviews that went nowhere. She adjusted her approach with each attempt, refining her resume, practicing answers to common questions, researching companies more thoroughly. Each rejection contained information if you knew how to extract it. After 127 applications, she received a call back. A logistics company needed a data entry clerk. The position paid $9 an hour, just above minimum wage, but it offered something more valuable than money. It offered legitimacy, an office, a desk, a computer, a pathway out of the shadows where undocumented labor lives. She arrived for the interview, wearing a suit purchased from a thrift store, altered by hand the night before because she couldn't afford a tailor. The interview lasted 12 minutes. The hiring manager seemed skeptical, asking pointed questions about her background, her education, her gaps in employment. Amal answered honestly. She didn't embellish, she didn't pretend. She simply explained what she'd done, where she'd come from, and what she was capable of learning. At the end, he said they'd be in touch. She knew that meant no. 3 days later, he called. They wanted to offer her the position, but there was a problem. Her references, the cleaning company, the diner, the dry cleaner, weren't the professional references they typically required. Could she provide something more traditional? Amal explained she didn't have traditional references because she'd never had a traditional job. She offered instead to work for free for 1 week to prove her capabilities. The hiring manager went silent. Then he said yes. That week, Amal worked without pay, arriving early, leaving late, volunteering for every task nobody else wanted. She organized filing systems that hadn't been touched in years. She noticed discrepancies in shipping logs and brought them to her supervisor's attention. She learned their software through observation and practice, staying after hours to master functions she didn't understand. On Friday, they offered her the position permanently, not because they felt sorry for her, because she demonstrated value they couldn't ignore. She kept 2 of her 3 jobs for another year, sleeping 4 hours a night, saving every possible dollar. She enrolled in business courses at community college, paid for with grants and loans and sheer determination. She studied supply chain management, international trade regulations, customs documentation. The concepts came slowly at first, filtered through the translation process still happening in her mind, but they came. Within 3 years, she'd moved from data entry to logistics coordination. Within 5, she was managing international shipments. Within 7, she'd identified a gap in the market: small businesses that needed international shipping solutions but couldn't afford dedicated logistics departments. She started her own company from her apartment, using savings that represented years of 16-hour days and declined social invitations and meals skipped to make the numbers work. The first year, she signed 4 clients. The second year, 11. The third year, 43. Today, her company coordinates logistics for over 200 clients across 4 continents, employing people from 18 different countries, many of them refugees like herself who needed someone to see their potential instead of their accent. Her annual revenue exceeds $8 million. But ask Amal about her success and she won't talk about the money. She'll talk about the notebook. She still has it, those first pages filled with misspelled English words, rejected job applications tracked like battle scars, bus schedules memorized because she couldn't afford mistakes. She keeps it in her desk drawer as a reminder that the distance between impossible and inevitable is measured entirely by the work you're willing to do when nobody's watching, when nobody believes in you, when you barely believe in yourself. The battlefield isn't out there in the world. It's inside your own mind, between the voice that says quit and the voice that says continue. Amal won that battle one word at a time, one rejection at a time, one sleepless night at a time. Victory didn't come from talent or luck or connections. It came from refusing to accept that her starting point determined her ending point. Sulien Cartwright sat across from the oncologist, watching the doctor's mouth move but hearing nothing except the roaring silence in his own head. 62 years old. Terminal diagnosis. 18 months, maybe less. The steel mill where he'd worked for 37 years had retired him with a pension and a handshake. Now his body was retiring him from life itself. He drove home in a fog, pulled into his driveway, and sat in the truck for 2 hours before going inside. His wife knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. He told her everything. They cried together. Then they sat in silence, holding hands like they had on their first date 40 years ago, before mortgages and children and the relentless grind of building a life had consumed all their attention. That night, Sulien couldn't sleep. He walked through his house at 3 in the morning, looking at photographs, on walls, certificates his kids had earned, the furniture he'd built with his own hands. This is what remained of 62 years. Objects, memories, evidence of a life lived but never really examined. He'd gone to work, paid bills, raised children, been a good husband, a decent neighbor. He'd done everything society asked of him. And now it was ending, and he realized with crushing clarity that he'd never done anything he truly wanted to do. He found a yellow legal pad in the kitchen drawer and started writing. Not a bucket list of tourist destinations or luxury experiences. Something deeper. 50 things he'd always wanted to accomplish but had postponed for someday. Learning to paint landscapes. Writing the story of his grandfather's immigration from Wales, before those memories disappeared forever. Starting a mentorship program for young men in the neighborhood who had no fathers. Building as a greenhouse. Reading the complete works of Dickens. Mastering woodworking beyond basic carpentry. Teaching someone his skills before they died with him. The list grew. Some items were small, achievable in an afternoon. Others were massive undertakings that would require months or years. Years he supposedly didn't have. But Sulien made a decision as the sun rose that morning. If he had 18 months, he'd live 50 years worth of purpose in that time. If he had less, he'd compress even more. The deadline wasn't a death sentence. It was the wake-up call he'd needed for decades. He started immediately. That same week, he bought canvas, brushes, and oil paints. He'd never held a paintbrush in his life except to paint walls. He watched tutorial videos online, feeling foolish, a 62-year-old man learning what children learn. His first attempts were embarrassing. Colors that didn't blend, proportions that made no sense, but he painted anyway. Every morning, after breakfast, 3 hours at the easel he'd set up in the garage. Simultaneously, he began interviewing his mother, now 87, about his grandfather's journey from Cardiff to Pennsylvania in 1952. She'd told fragments of these stories throughout his childhood, but he'd never really listened. Now he recorded every conversation, taking notes, asking questions, researching historical context online. His grandfather had left Wales with nothing, worked in the same steel mill Sulien would later join, built a life through sheer determination. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Within a month, Sulien had contacted the community center about starting a mentorship program. They were interested but bureaucratic: applications, background checks, liability waivers, insurance requirements. The process would take months. Sulien didn't have months to waste on paperwork. He started informally instead, reaching out to neighbors, asking if their sons needed someone to talk to, someone to teach them practical skills. Within weeks, 3 young men were coming to his garage on Saturday mornings, learning woodworking, metalworking, basic home repair. He taught them more than skills. He taught them the value of finishing what you start, of measuring twice and cutting once, of fixing your mistakes instead of hiding them. These weren't lectures. They were lessons embedded in the work itself. When a joint didn't fit properly, they'd disassemble it and try again. When a weld was weak, they'd grind it down and redo it correctly. The boys learned that excellence isn't about perfection on the first attempt. It's about persistent refinement until the work meets the standard. Month 6 arrived, then month 12. The oncologist was confused. The tumor hadn't grown. In fact, some markers had improved. No medical explanation. They ran more tests. Adjusted the prognosis, maybe 2 years, maybe more. Sulien didn't celebrate. He just kept working through his list. By month 18, the original expiration date, he'd completed 28 of his 50 goals. He'd painted 37 landscapes, some terrible, some surprisingly competent. He'd written 200 pages documenting his grandfather's story, interviews woven with historical research. His mentorship program had expanded to 12 young men. He'd built the greenhouse, read Dickens, learned basic metalsmithing, volunteered at the library teaching literacy to adults. Something unexpected happened. The more he gave away his time, his knowledge, his energy, the stronger he felt, not physically stronger, though even that seemed to improve. Mentally stronger, purposefully stronger. He'd spent 62 years conserving himself, protecting his time, waiting for retirement to finally live. Now, with death supposedly imminent, he was more alive than he'd ever been. Year 2 passed. Then year 3. The doctors stopped using the word terminal. They started using words like remission, anomaly, unprecedented. Sulien didn't care about their terminology. He cared about his list. By year 5, he'd completed 43 items. Some goals had evolved. The mentorship program had become an official nonprofit. The book about his grandfather had been published by a small regional press. His paintings had been displayed in a local gallery exhibition. Year 8 arrived. Sulien turned 70. Healthy, vital, purposeful. The deadline that should have destroyed him had liberated him instead. He'd learned what most people never discover. Time becomes your ally the moment you stop treating it as infinite. Urgency isn't the enemy of achievement. Complacency is. Comfort is. The illusion that you have forever is what kills dreams long before your body stops breathing. Those young men he'd mentored, 2 had started their own construction business, 1 had become a welder at the mill, another was teaching woodworking at the high school. They'd learned from Sulien that your circumstances don't define your contributions. Your choices do. Your daily actions do. The decision to start now instead of someday does. Sulien still maintains his list. 7 goals remain. He'll complete them, then write 7 more. The prognosis no longer matters. He'd discovered that living isn't measured in years remaining. It's measured in purpose pursued, knowledge shared, and the refusal to postpone, meaning until conditions are perfect. Conditions are never perfect. You begin anyway. You build anyway. You contribute anyway. That's how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things against every conceivable odd. Lisette Moreau received the call at work. Her husband had collapsed at the construction site. By the time she reached the hospital, he was gone. Aneurysm, instant. No warning, no goodbye. She was 31 years old with 4 children under the age of 9 and a checking account that held $800. The funeral expenses consumed her savings. The life insurance policy her husband always said he'd increase? Still, at the minimum, $25,000 coverage from when they'd first married. It would cover maybe 6 months of expenses if she stretched every penny. After that, nothing. She had no college degree, no career, no plan. She'd been a full-time mother because that's what they'd agreed made sense. Now that agreement had left her completely unprepared for survival. The first month was chaos. Bills arrived with her dead husband's name on them. Relatives offered sympathy but little practical help. Friends brought casseroles that her children were too grief-stricken to eat. The school counselor suggested therapy she couldn't afford. Everyone had advice. Nobody had solutions. Lisette realized quickly that drowning in sorrow was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her children needed someone to stay functional. Grief would have to wait. She took inventory. High school diploma, 10 years away from the workforce. No specialized skills. 4 children who needed food, clothing, stability, and a mother who hadn't completely fallen apart. The obstacles were immense. The alternative was unacceptable. She'd watched her own mother surrender to circumstance after her father left. Watched poverty become a multi-generational inheritance. That pattern ended here. Lisette started applying for positions. Anything that offered benefits and consistent hours. Receptionist jobs, administrative assistant roles, customer service positions. The interviews were humiliating. Employers would scan her resume, note the employment gap, and their expressions would shift to polite dismissal. Nobody wanted to invest in someone who'd been out of the game that long, especially someone with 4 kids who'd need constant time off for sick days and school emergencies. After 37 rejections, she stopped applying for jobs and started applying to schools. Community college, night classes. She'd study something practical, something that led directly to employment. She researched programs with the highest placement rates and discovered paralegal studies. Law firms always needed support staff. The program took 2 years. She didn't have 2 years. She'd compress it into 14 months by taking maximum course loads and summer sessions. The math seemed impossible. 4 children. Full-time school. She'd need income during this period. She found work as a night custodian at an office complex, 10 at night until 4 in the morning. The timing worked. Her oldest daughter, only 13, would watch the younger 3 while Lisette was gone. It wasn't ideal. It probably violated several parenting guidelines. It was necessary. Her schedule became mechanical. Wake at 6, get children ready for school, handle household tasks until 2, sleep from 2 until 8, wake again, help with homework, prepare dinner, get children to bed by 9:30, leave for work at 9:45. Study during slow periods at work. Attend classes during the day whenever possible, usually 2 to 3 times per week. Sleep became something she did in fragments, stolen hours that never felt sufficient. The first semester nearly broke her. Juggling legal terminology, procedural rules, case law research, while operating on 4 hours of sleep felt impossible. She'd sit in class struggling to focus, then go directly to work and push a mop for 6 hours. Her body ached constantly. Her mind felt like it was grinding itself down. Twice she sat in her car in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, seriously considering quitting. Both times, she thought about her children, not in some sentimental way. Practically, if she quit, what example would she set? That when life gets difficult, you surrender? That obstacles are excuses? That your children's futures should be limited by your circumstances? She started the car and went to class. 14 months later, she completed the program with honors, not because she was naturally gifted, because she couldn't afford to fail a single class, retake it. Failure wasn't punished with a bad grade. It was punished with delayed employment, which meant delayed income, which meant potential disaster. Every assignment mattered. Every exam was critical. She studied like someone whose children's welfare depended on her grades, because it did. She applied to 8 law firms, received offers from 3, chose the one with the best benefits package and started at $42,000 annually, not wealth, but stability, health insurance, a path forward. She could reduce her custodial hours, sleep more than 4 hours a night, be present for her children in ways she hadn't been able to during those brutal 14 months. 5 years passed. Lisette became a senior paralegal, then a litigation specialist. Her salary increased to $78,000. She enrolled in law school, part-time, night classes, because why stop now? Her children watched their mother come home exhausted every night and study at the kitchen table. They learned that adversity isn't a stop sign. It's just terrain you navigate with determination. Today, Lisette practices family law. She specializes in representing women going through divorces, custody battles, situations where they're legally vulnerable and emotionally devastated. She knows what it's like to face impossible circumstances with dependent children. She knows the terror of not knowing how you'll survive the next month. She doesn't just practice law. She provides the advocacy she wished someone had provided her. Her oldest daughter graduated college last spring, studying education, because she watched her mother transform through learning. Her son wants to become an attorney. The younger two talk about their futures with confidence, not fear. They witnessed firsthand that circumstances are temporary, but character is permanent. Her story isn't unique. Walk through any successful person's history far enough, and you'll find a moment when everything collapsed. What separates those who rebuild from those who remain broken isn't talent or luck or resources. It's the decision to continue when continuation seems pointless. It's showing up exhausted and doing the work anyway. It's refusing to accept that your current chapter determines your final story. You're facing something right now, some obstacle that feels insurmountable, some circumstance that seems designed specifically to defeat you. You're wondering if you have what it takes to overcome it. Here's your answer. You do. Not because you're special. Because you're human, and humans possess a capability that transcends logic. We continue. We adapt. We find ways forward that didn't exist until we needed them. Your odds don't matter. Your circumstances don't define you. Your past doesn't limit your future. What matters is the choice you make right now, in this moment, when everything suggests you should quit. Choose to begin. Choose to continue. Choose to fight against every odd stacked against. That choice, repeated daily despite exhaustion and doubt and fear, transforms impossible into inevitable. You've got everything you need. Now go prove it to yourself.